Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. As Joe Biden kickstarts his 100-day agenda, his priority will be largely to restore order and normalcy on the domestic front. Donald Trump had unleashed trade wars with allies and adversaries. China has called for a reset in ties with the United States, and the new president's approach to Russia and Iran will be closely watched. Joe Biden's policy towards China and Pakistan will be critical for India, even as the positive trajectory of Indo-US ties is likely to grow further. We're now joined by India's former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Shyam Saran. Mr. Saran, thank you very much for joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Joe Biden's priorities right now will be largely domestic. But if there is one country that would be weighing on Joe Biden's mind, which one would that be?
Oh, I think there's not much to debate about that. I think it will be China that will perhaps be the most priority item on his agenda. I think how he handles the relationship with China will, of course, have an impact across the world, including very much on India.
Of course. Looking at what's happening in South Asia, you have a China which wants to somehow reset the Asian order. It is aggressively trying to push India on the Ladakh border. You've got increasing tensions between India and Pakistan. How much would Joe Biden like to be involved in the region in his first year, sir?
Well, I do not expect that South Asia will be very high on the international agenda for Joe Biden. I think India will certainly be important in terms of the Indo-Pacific strategy, in terms of whatever is planned in terms of how to deal with the China challenge in Asia. As you would have seen, India, the Indo-Pacific strategy has been given a pretty high billing in these early days by the appointment of Kurt Campbell as a special assistant to the president for the Indo-Pacific. So I would imagine that Indo-Pacific strategy, which also enjoyed a certain priority during the Trump years, that priority is going to continue. And in that context, for example, the taking forward of the Quad and trying to see how we can strengthen the maritime security in this region. I think this is where India will be and will continue to be a very, very important partner. And of course, India-US relations should not only be seen in the context of US relations with China or our relations with China, but there are any number of very good reasons why the partnership between India and the United States is intrinsically very important. So I think we should also focus attention on that aspect. But to come back to what you mentioned, I'm not very sure that South Asia itself is going to be very much high on the radar screen as far as this administration is concerned.
In the last 4 years, sir, during the Trump presidency, trade deficit and defense and security issues had taken priority whenever it came to negotiations, bilateral negotiations between India and US. Do you think Joe Biden would like to somehow broaden the horizon when it comes to the Indo-US relationship?
Well, as I pointed out, the security aspect as represented by the Indo-Pacific strategy is going to be an element of continuity with the previous administration. As far as trade-related issues are concerned, I think, the record over the last several years under different administrations has been that the India-US relationship, even though it is full of opportunity, and it has been expanding over the last several years, somehow this is one area where there appears to be always a degree of friction, a degree of irritation between the two countries. And it is my hope that this particular trend does not continue under this administration as well. What I see is that this administration is now looking at not only trade in just a bilateral context, but it is also looking at, for example, a renewed stress on multilateralism. Perhaps you might see some initiative from the United States with respect to the WTO. It is possible that you might see a certain renewed interest in the US in rejoining the, the Trans-Pacific trade arrangement. There is even talk about, a transatlantic trade agreement being revived with Europe. So what I think we will see is the United States of America, perhaps in a sense, coming back to the norm of looking at trade and economic issues in a somewhat more larger multilateral context. Now, here the problem is that as far as multilateral trade rules are concerned, the kind of approach that the US would be taking would perhaps be very different from the approach that India would be taking as a developing country. So I would hope that this is one area which has the potential of becoming an irritant. Perhaps there could be early and more intense, engagement between the two sides to ensure that we are able to, in a sense, fashion a good platform for taking our economic and trade relations forward. Trade between the two countries has expanded very rapidly.
Right.
India is one of the major trading partners. You have seen the investment figures from the United States. So there is really no reason why the economic and trade relationship should not be a really dynamic component of the relationship.
Right. And the outgoing ambassador, Kenneth Juster, had expressed his frustration about the trade partnership being below its potential. But just to speak about US's adversaries, Russia and Iran, the Washington Post has said that Joe Biden is unlikely to go for a reset in US-Russia ties. How do you think this is going to impact India and India's defense ties with the United States? Do you think there could be CAATSA sanctions on India as a result of procuring the S-400 from Russia?
No, I do not think so, because I, put it in relation to what has been, in fact, a very, very positive aspect of our relationship over the last 10 years or so, which is that, there has been a very significant upgrading of our defense relationship. We have now concluded the 3 foundational agreements between the two countries. The defense hardware relationship is much closer than it has been before. It is about $20 billion, if I'm not mistaken. And with the prospect of this expanding even further, with the kind of threat which we are facing on the borders with China, I imagine that the defense relationship, both in the hardware category as well as in the software category, for example, in terms of, say, intelligence sharing, etc., I expect that this relationship is going to expand even further. So in that context, even though the S-400 sale to India could be an irritant, but I do not think that the United States will, sort of look at that issue as something which is so fundamental that it is prepared to derail what is a very, very, very profitable, in fact, relationship for the United States of America.
Okay, and in terms of some of India's internal issues, when we moved towards revoking Article 370 in Kashmir, when we rolled out the CAA, there were Democrats who had raised concerns about protests in India, about the treatment of minorities. Do you think India will probably have to reset how it approaches the Joe Biden administration? Do you think these are points that the Joe Biden administration, the Democrats, would be looking at very, very closely?
Well, there could be a focus on these issues, and this would not be the first time that there has been a focus on such issues. I mean, we have faced this before in our relations with the United States. So I don't think I would make a big deal about it. My anticipation is that given the very strong sort of bonds of friendship between the two countries, and which is going to be perhaps even more important going forward. Even if these concerns are expressed, these concerns may probably be expressed in private and not made into a kind of a public issue. And I think we should have the maturity to be able to deal with these kind of issues. Perhaps with not too much prickliness in a sense. And I would also like to say that, one of the great assets that India has in its relationship with the United States is that it has enjoyed over the last, 10 to 15 years, a very strong bipartisan consensus in the US Congress. Despite the polarization that you have seen in that country, political polarization, there has not been any difference of opinion between the Republicans and the Democrats on the need to strengthen relationship with India, to expand relationship with India. And I think this is an asset which is very important to us, and we should continue to nurture it. So even if these irritants come up, I think we should handle them, as I said, with a degree of maturity.
All right, Mr. Shyam Saran, thank you very much for summing up Joe Biden's foreign policy priorities and the trajectory for the Indo-US partnership as well. Thanks once again for being with us on CNBC TV 18. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18 for more news and updates.